Allan hated Luther. Hated him so much, he planned to kill him. But before we continue, I should point out that Luther was a cat. A fine black beast with penetrating green eyes, which he used to stare at Allan, much to Allan's discomfort. Allan was a librarian and supposedly in charge of a large suburban branch. Luther was one of his employees, as in chief mouser and assistant pest control specialist. Not that Luther did much in the way of catching mice. Instead, he spent most of his time lolling around on the furniture or the circ desk, visiting older patrons and running away from the children, intent on mauling him. And in tormenting Allan, of course. Allan hated, no, detested cats, and with the unerring instincts of his breed, Luther haunted him for the pleasure of getting under the librarian's skin. If Allan left the office, sometimes only for a moment, he would find Luther curled up on his chair and disinclined to budge. Then, once Allan had succeeded in removing him, he would jump up onto his desk, dislodge his papers, sprawl across the librarian's keyboard, and make a general nuisance of himself. It was just as bad outside of the office. Luther would follow Allan around, even following him to the washroom, where he would wait outside the door to resume shadowing when the librarian emerged. But his worst trick was to run between Allan's legs as he was walking up or down the stairs, making him stumble and on a few occasions actually fall down. "That thing is going to kill me someday," Allan would mutter in anger. But it was the fury of impotence, since everyone else, both staff and patrons, loved Luther and were very protective of him. "He's just trying to make friends," Allan's staff would say. But Allan wasn't fooled. He could see the malevolence lurking in Luther's kryptonite green eyes, and when they were alone, he would talk to it. "Come on, Luther, leave me alone," and then plead with it. "Why must you pester me so? Please, please leave me alone." But Luther would just stare at him, with the ghost of a feline smile, and Allan knew he was just going to have to live, or at least coexist with it, with Luther. But one cold winter evening, as Allan worked after hours, alone, Luther went too far. Allan was walking up the stairs between the main level and his office, a mug of freshly brewed coffee in hand, when Luther darted rapidly between his feet, causing him to stumble. The librarian narrowly avoided falling, but managed to pour boiling hot coffee all over the front of his shirt and all over the crotch of his trousers. "Ouch!" Sputtering and swearing, he stalked off to the washroom to clean himself off, while Luther made himself scarce. When Allan finally emerged, he headed for the basement, and when he returned, he had something in his hands. As for Luther, he was keeping Allan's office chair warm for him by sleeping on it. But he woke up when Allan came in and slammed the door shut behind him. The object Allan had in his hand looked like a small laundry bag with a string tie, one of the bags used by the children's librarians to hold picture books, puppets, etc. But this one ended up holding a particularly ornery, hissing, spitting black cat. Not that Luther went without a fight, and Allan had some vivid scratch marks on his face before he managed to tie the bag shut. The area had just experienced a real Canadian blizzard, and there were glacier-sized mountains of snow piled up along the sides of the roads. Allan, with his squirming captive by his side, drove through the snowbound streets and eventually pulled to the side of a bridge spanning a partially frozen creek, where he calmly tossed the sack over the rail and down into the water, ice and snow. "That ought to take care of you," Allan said grimly. He then drove home, and that night he slept like a baby. The next day, the staff tore the library apart in their futile attempts to find Luther. One of the clerks asked Allan, "You don't think Luther got out, do you?" Allan shrugged. "Seems to me it had a good sense of self-preservation." Of course, the clerk noticed that Allan had referred to Luther in the past tense and called him an it. She had also noticed the scratch marks on his face, but said nothing. Allan, after all, was technically the boss. But tongues wagged in the staff room, and the patrons were sad, especially the children. The library's art gallery decided to help the situation by hanging a huge painting of a black cat with emerald green eyes on the wall of the main floor directly across from the circ desk. Everybody loved it. Everybody but Allan, for the cat's eyes seemed to follow him everywhere. "That picture looks just like Luther, doesn't it, Allan?" gushed one of the clerks. "It's like he's come back to us." Allan admitted the resemblance and inwardly shuddered. And a week later, the black cat returned, in the form of a stuffed animal. It was a large, plush black cat with green button eyes, a pink nose, and a curvy pink smile. Around its throat, it wore a small placard which said, "The cat came back." It was sitting on a chair in Allan's office, and when he came in and turned on the lights, he barely suppressed a scream. The damn thing looked just like Luther. When he confronted the staff, they professed complete ignorance of the stuffed toy, which they promptly dubbed Luther, and about where it came from. "Maybe the children's department sent it to us," they suggested, "since they know how most of us miss Luther." But the children's department hadn't sent it. The staff quickly installed it at the circ desk for everyone to admire, but that didn't stop it from following Allan around like some kind of weird voodoo fetish. The voodoo Luther was always ending up in Allan's office, on his chair, his desk, his keyboard, or in the staff room, sitting on the table across from him when he went to eat, and also on the stairs. He tried to keep it from getting on his nerves, but it did, so he chastised the staff about it during one of their regular meetings. "I wish you guys would stop putting that thing where I can trip over it. It's always in my office, in the staff room, even on the stairs." "But Allan," one of the clerks protested, "Luther never leaves the circ desk." The rest nodded in agreement and looked at each other, a look which said, "He's losing it." Maybe he was. When he calmed down, Allan had to admit that Luther only appeared on the stairs when he was alone in the building, so no one else could have put it there. The damn thing couldn't move by itself, could it? Could it? Could it? Allan had to work alone in the library from time to time, and that's when things began to get weird. When he found Luther on the stairs, he would return it to the circ desk, and a few minutes later, it would be back on the steps. Allan would lock it in a closet downstairs or throw it in the dumpster outside. But in a few minutes, it would be back on the stairs again. It got worse. Allan didn't bother to turn on all the lights, when he was alone in the building, and as he worked in his office, he was always hearing faint sounds or seeing things out of the corner of his eye. But when he stopped to look, there was nothing there. And when he stopped to listen, dead silence. At first. But one night, he became aware of a faint but steady sound. So soft and distant, he thought it was just the wind outside the building. But it became louder and clearer, and he recognized it as the mewing of a cat. Alan tried to ignore it at first, telling himself it was outside and no concern of his, particularly if it was some damn cat. But the noise kept increasing, and he began to wonder if it was coming from somewhere inside. And then he thought, was it Luther? Had Luther come back? Alan couldn't take it anymore and began to frantically search the building. But racing from his office, he almost tripped over the toy Luther, which would have caused him to fall down the stairs and break his neck. He booted the stuffy in anger, causing it to fly through the air and crash somewhere in the stacks, while the black cat in the humongous painting regarded him with baleful and reproachful eyes. Alan explored all 3 floors, the main floor, the office floor, and the basement, and found nothing. But he could still hear it, and could still sense movement all around him, black things darting past him, just out of sight. He gave up and went to a nearby bar for a pint to calm his nerves. Or 2 pints. Or 3. And he was muttering to himself by the time he got home. God damn that Luther. Is he still alive and come back? I should have done what that guy did to that one-eyed cat in that Poe story. The black cat. I should have hanged it. I should have hanged it. Hang it, I should have hanged it. And with that regret, Alan lay down on his bed, fully dressed, and fell sound asleep. When he awoke, he found himself in darkness, save for the light from a few tall green candles. But in spite of the gloom, he recognized his surroundings, the large meeting room in his library. Alan wasn't alone. The room was filled with large black cats, all sitting and staring at him, some on chairs, some on tables, and some on the floor, eyes yellow and green, with the occasional eyes of blue. Dead silence. But Alan knew instinctively that this was a trial, and that he was the accused, and that the charge was murder. A ripple of movement ran through the assembled felines, and suddenly a half-starved beast, as white as it was black, limped up onto the table and raised an injured paw, pointing directly at Alan. It was Luther. Alan wouldn't have recognized it. It was so different from the sleek, well-fed cat which had been his nemesis. And he wasn't sure if it was alive or if he was looking at a ghost. But he did know the raised paw was both an accusation and a sentence. Death. The clouder, the court of black cats, began to move towards him, forcing him out the door of the meeting room and across the floor to the head of the stairs, where a noose hung down from an overhead beam. Alan turned to see Luther on a step at the bottom of the stairs. Once again, Luther raised his damaged paw, and the noose fell around the librarian's neck. And then Luther's paw dropped. Something struck Alan on the back of the neck, and he felt like he was falling. When staff arrived the following morning, They found Alan's body at the foot of the stairs. His neck was broken, a fact which puzzled the chief medical officer who performed the autopsy. Falling down the short flight of stairs should have resulted, at most, in a broken arm. But then, he was also puzzled by what looked like rope burns around Alan's neck. The branch was closed for several days, and staff were given access to counseling. But they recovered rather quickly. And the day after reopening, Luther returned. He was outside the main door when staff came in the morning, his frost-damaged fur more white than black. He was missing one of his green eyes, and his sinister paw was frostbitten. But it was definitely Luther, and he was soon safely terrorizing the new librarian, Lisa, who liked cats and wasn't bothered by his attentions or his intentions. So, should you ever have occasion to visit this particular, and perhaps accursed, library branch, you will find both Luther and his plush mannequin regally installed at the circulation desk, unless he's in Lisa's office, trying to bug her. And be sure to check out the colossal painting of the black cat with the kryptonite eyes. And if you look at the lower left-hand corner, you'll see some vandal has scratched a little symbol into the paint. Ever play hangman? That symbol. A hanged man. Ghost Stories of a Librarian. Library after midnight. In recent years, many libraries in North America have hosted sleepovers for their young adult patrons. Perhaps your local library has hosted such an event. I was never involved in such a program. Instead, I had my own sleepover. I was visiting a library branch on the other side of town from my home. It was late afternoon on a cloudy, overcast day. I was reading a magazine, a copy of the Fortean Times, while sitting in a comfy chair by an upstairs window, when the article I was reading, not being particularly compelling, I began nodding off. So, I gave up. I shut my eyes and said to myself, "Take me, sleep. Take me." Which is when a kid began screaming in the nearby children's area. Now, I'm not one of those grumpy old people who think libraries should be as silent as a tomb. And I understand little kids can sometimes be rather noisy. But hey, they're patrons too. But this particular child was interfering with my attempt to obtain the balm of slumber. Worse, the hysterics had encouraged another child to burst into loud wailing tears. Stereo! I had resigned myself to going someplace to grab a coffee in an attempt to wake up, when I noticed the door of a nearby meeting room had been left open. Now I knew that along the windows of the meeting room there was a raised bench to provide extra seating, and I also realized it would be the perfect spot to stretch out for a few moments of blissful shut-eye. He who hesitates is lost, so I quickly entered the room and closed the door behind me. I turned out the lights, then closed the curtains, plunging the room into almost total darkness. Then I lay down, stretched out, and passed out. I awoke after a few refreshing minutes and took a look at my watch to see what time it was now. Midnight. Midnight? I staggered to my feet. It really was dark inside the meeting room. As dark as it was outside? I fumbled my way to the door, threw it open, and found the interior of the library plunged in darkness too. I could just make out the clock on the far wall. Yup, midnight. I couldn't believe I'd slept so long. I must have been far more tired than I realized. And I'd only had half a cup of coffee in the morning, so I hadn't really had any artificial stimulus. Still, and the joke was, I was still tired. I guess no one checked the meeting room, or if they hadn't noticed me in the enveloping darkness. Oh well, nothing for it but to go home. And that's when I remembered the doors were all alarmed. Oh, I could still leave and set off an alarm. However, I would be long gone by the time security showed up, so no, nothing was going to happen to me. But I was afraid some poor staff member would get in trouble over it, and I didn't want that to happen. After all, I used to work with these guys, and I knew them all by name, so I certainly wanted to spare them any grief. So, what to do? What to do? I suppose I could call one of them at home and ask them to come and get me out. Or I could go back to sleep and get let out in the morning. Everybody would have a good laugh at me at my expense and no real harm done. So that is what I did. That is what I decided to do. But I had no sooner lay down upon the bench and shut my eyes when I heard some noise. A lot of noise. It sounded like a lot of people, and it was hard, lying down in the dark, to tell if they were laughing, or screaming. But if it was laughter, it was certainly raucous and discordant. I wondered if there was an after-hour library program. But then I remembered it was midnight, and there were no such things as midnight library programs. I didn't think. Cautiously, I opened the door to the meeting room and peered out. Now, the meeting room was on an upper or mezzanine level, and from the shadows of the doorway, I could see down onto the main floor of the library. And I saw nothing. Just row upon row of dark shelves of books. But wait. What was that in front of the large circulation desk? In the more open area? What? What I saw was not so much people as a shadowy movement, as insubstantial as smoke, a dark shimmering which reminded me of the distortion caused by heat radiating off a hot road in summertime. Almost impossible to explain or describe. But something was there, something moving, but shadowy, almost invisible, and making a hell of a lot of noise. Something malignant. The fear washed over me, forcing me to retreat into the comforting obscurity of the meeting room. I didn't know what was out there, but what I did know was that it would harm me if it found me. If it found me. More like when it found me. I didn't think I could make it outside without encountering whatever was out there. So I decided upon the next best thing. I would pretend to be asleep. Play possum. Yeah, I know, pretty lame, but that's all I could think of at the time. I lay down on the bench, screwed my eyes shut, and lay still. It was even harder lying there, listening to the cascading eruption of agonized hilarity, like a laughter yoga class from hell. Worse still, the laughter was getting closer, and I was sure I could hear footsteps. Light, stealthy, but absolutely footsteps. And then the knocking started, at first lightly, like someone was tapping their finger on a counter or on a metal bookshelf, but it became progressively louder, 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 as if someone was slapping the palms of their hands or pounding their fists against the walls or any solid object they could strike for effect. In fact, who, or whatever was causing the knocking, was hitting the walls and windows so hard, I was sure they would break something, smash something, especially the glass. Something furry brushed against my face in the dark, but I managed to stifle my cry, and then relaxed when I realized it was only Poe. Poe, the library cat. The branch had a rodent problem, hence Poe, the exterminator. He was a sleek black cat with beautiful yellow eyes and was a favorite of the patrons, especially the kids. No doubt he too had been disturbed by the hubbub and now clung to me for safety and protection. Something began slamming the program room door with an impact as loud as the blast from a cannon. I turned over, face down on the bench, eyes glued shut, Poe frantically trying to burrow beneath me. The door of the meeting room burst open. Deathly silence, and then the sound of heavy footsteps on the carpeted floor. Something was standing over us. I held my breath. A terrific blow smacked me hard on the side of the head, so painful and humiliating it brought tears to my eyes. But I forced myself not to move. I lay there, cowering, and felt something lean forward until it was mere inches from my uppermost ear. I tried not to lash out in anger or start laughing. It was playing with me, and it was all pretty embarrassing. But poor Poe couldn't stand it. With a meow which could only be called a shriek, the black cat bounded for the open doorway and disappeared into the main area of the library. Almost immediately, the presence which had been oppressing me was gone, and something told me that the only way I would get out alive was to flee immediately while I still had the chance. The meeting room had a side door leading to a stairwell connected with a fire door, and in less than a minute I was outside and sprinting across the parking lot to my car. Driving away from the building, I saw a car from the security company speeding towards the library, but I was too far away and going too fast for him to see me. I drove at high speed and when I got home, turned on all the lights in the house. I didn't sleep a wink till dawn. After all, I'd already had plenty of sleep. But nothing seemed to have followed me home. Nothing I was aware of. I stayed away from that particular library branch for about a month. But the next time I visited, I could see the staff were clearly upset. "What's wrong?" I asked a clerk at the circulation desk. "Oh, our little kitty cat, Poe, you know, the black cat? Well, he's vanished. We've had the whole community looking for him everywhere, but he's totally disappeared. It was like he was spirited off the face of the earth." And so, the cat didn't come back. Instead, it was a goner. And the creatures of the night managed to spirit it far away. Away. Poor Poe. Meow. A clouder of cats. I woke up again, in a cold sweat, my heart about to explode. A nightmare? The same nightmare? I heard noise from outside, the noise I had been dreading. Meow. A cat's meow. I got up, but didn't turn on the lights. Instead, I went to the window, parted the drapes, and looked out. 2 cats sat at the edge of my driveway. One was a small black cat with yellow eyes, but the other cat was new. It was gray and scruffy, and was beating its tail against the hard, cold concrete. New, but I'd seen the gray cat before. It was meowing in time to the thud of its tail on the driveway. What was it doing? Calling the rest of the group? The clouder? Last night, there was only one cat. The small black cat with yellow eyes. Tonight, there's 2. And tomorrow night? I lay down on the bed, staring up at the darkened ceiling. I knew I wasn't going to sleep this night. I was afraid to sleep and to dream about cats. According to a study I came across on the net, your average domesticated house cat spends 4 hours a day trying to figure out how it might eat its owners, who, fortunately, are just a little too big. But they're thinking about it. Cats are carnivorous, predatory animals, not forever friends, although they might be friends for keeps. Still, I didn't always hate cats. Until that night. But now, I can't stand to be in the same room with one. I end up going to pieces. I broke up with my ex because of her cat, a silver tabby. You know, love me, love my cat. But I just couldn't stand how it was always underfoot and always around. I might have been able to deal with it. Until that night. This is what happened. Now, once upon a time, I was a hard-bodied, athletic young man, not the obese, chain-smoking slob I am today. What happened has left me unable to work, unable to function, sitting here, drinking alone in the dark. But 3 years ago, I was riding my bike on a long-distance trek along the old Talbot Trail on the north shore of Lake Erie. It's a sparsely populated farming area dotted with small towns. It was late afternoon, and I was riding through a particularly isolated stretch when I noticed a writhing band of grayish clouds churning over the dark waters of the lake. A storm was coming in off the water, a bad one. I'm going to get wet tonight, I said to myself. I'll be damn lucky if the tent don't blow down. And then, back from the road, I spotted a possible shelter in the form of an abandoned farmhouse and decided to check it out. I parked my bike on the sagging front porch. The front door was unlocked, and on entering what I suppose was the living room, I was pleasantly surprised at how clean and tidy it was. Instead of the usual broken bottles and graffiti, there was just a pile of old yellow newspapers on the hearth of an old stone fireplace. I was also pleased to find a table and an old chair firm enough to sit on. The windows were even intact. I had no sooner gotten inside when the storm hit, lashing my shelter with high winds and torrential rain. I was worried the rain might pour in through the roof and walls, but everything stayed dry. It got awfully dark, though, and cold. So dark I took some of the old newspapers and a few wooden boards I had found in a corner and started an impromptu fire. I was warming my hands over the flames when I was suddenly joined by a small black cat with lustrous yellow eyes. I was spooked at first, but once I realized it was merely a cat. Yeah, merely a cat. I said, "Where did you come from?" The little beast rubbed against my leg, purring, and then went to warm itself on the hearth. It was an almost domestic scene, and as it looked like I was going to be there for a while, I dug my paperback out of my knapsack and began to read by firelight. Just like Honest Abe Lincoln. It was my old, well-thumbed copy of the Selected Tales of Edgar Allan Poe, and I was just rereading the awful scene in The Black Cat, where the drunken narrator takes his penknife and... The scene made me wince, and looking up, I was much surprised to see we'd been joined by a second cat, a scruffy gray beast, which regarded me with cold, unblinking blue eyes. "Hello," I said, as the newcomer continued to stare at me. "Anyone else?" I had no sooner asked the question when I noticed an orange tabby crouched in a darkened corner on the other side of the room. "Well, I guess I won't have to worry about mice," I said to myself, as I didn't feel like making small talk at my companions, who were now all three staring at me. We sat in silence, and they didn't move when I got up to add more newspaper and scraps of wood to the fire. And as I sat musing, listening to the falling rain, I found myself thinking for some reason about Elizabeth Bathory, the vampire countess who liked to bathe in the blood of murdered virgins. The countess was eventually charged with witchcraft and the murder of over 650 girls, and walled up alive for her crimes. But before that, she used hordes, floods of howling and scratching cats as demonic familiars in order to attack her enemies. I came back to reality and saw the number of cats had doubled to 6. The new arrivals, dark felines of both black and gray, and all rather seedy in appearance. What is this? I asked myself. The revenge of the Countess Bathorny? But she lived in Hungary, not in southern Ontario. Or are the cats pissed off because I've been reading Poe? Reading The Black Cat. The wind suddenly howled, or meowed, and the front door flew open to admit wind and rain and 6 more cats, who came up to me and, stopping at my feet, looked at me with an expression which said, "We're hungry." And then, from the various dark corners, 12 more, no, 24 more, cats, tabbies, orange, silver and taupe, solids, bicoloreds, tricoloreds, calicos, tortoiseshells, cats with bibs and cats with tuxedos, Siamese cats, plus pure white and pure black cats with yellow, green, or orange eyes, poured into the room, all of them looking towards me. And that's when the hissing started. I was on my feet and, grabbing my backpack, was heading for the door, with cats nipping, butting, and pawing at my legs. As I forced my way through the increasingly crowded room, I tried to push the front door open, only to find it was blocked by a mewing and spitting mass of fur. When I finally crashed out into the porch, I found it crowded with cats who clawed at my arms, clawed at my eyes, even leaped on my head. Thank God I was still wearing my bike helmet. I grabbed my bike and staggered from the house, hoping they hadn't shredded the tires. Fortunately, there was still a light drizzle, which deterred my fastidious antagonists from chasing me. At first, but not for long. I got back to the main road and began pedaling like I had the hellhounds, or the hellcats, on my trail. The highway was slick, but the rain had finally ended, and the clouds parted to bathe everything in bright silvery moonlight. I looked over my shoulder. The abandoned farmhouse seemed to be haloed in a spectral yellowish light. Cat's eye yellow, black cat yellow. But that's not what caused me to cry out and pedal furiously for the protection of the next town. Instead, I cried out because the moonlight had shown the road behind me to be one dark moving mass, a carpet of cats, mewing, hissing, spitting, purring, and all running as fast as their 4 paws could take them, and all after me. They were all after me. I was hoping a transport truck, or at least an SUV, would come along and wipe some of them out. But there was nothing. No cars, no people, nothing. On what was usually a fairly busy road. It was like the rest of the world didn't exist. It was only me and my feline pursuers. I rode and rode and rode and rode, praying at the top of my lungs, and eventually reached the lights of a small town. And when I went to look behind me, the cats were gone. Well, not all of them. For in the distance, I could see a small black cat with lustrous yellow eyes. Somehow I made it back to Western Canada, but I was never the same. And after 3 years, ended up as a recluse, hiding behind the curtains of my darkened home. The other night I saw it out there, on the sidewalk across the street. A small black cat with lustrous yellow eyes. And tonight there's two. No, wait a minute. No, three. They've been joined by the orange tabby, and they're all looking towards the house, towards me. What do they want? Simple. They want me. They want dinner. I hope this short tale hasn't put you off your dinner. Please drop a like and comment and consider subscribing for more Night Floaters and ghost stories of a librarian.